Ms. Gibson, please come to order. Thank you. For March 3rd, Councilmember Zine, joined by my distinguished colleague, Councilmember Paul Koretz. And what about Councilmember Parks?
He is not expected.
He's not expected to be here today, so we're going to have a committee of two. And on the agenda, we have 4 items. We will begin with number 1. If you're here on a matter, one of the 4 items or public comment, you need to fill out a card and have that card to me before we bring that item forward. We don't accept cards on items after that matter is brought forward. So we're going to start with number 1, Madam Clerk.
On item 1, the city attorney and the city administrative officer have submitted reports and ordinance. This has to do with an amendment of the Los Angeles Administrative Code to include provisions for non-represented employees to provide overtime in excess of 40 hours actually worked instead of 40 hours compensated. This also contains a provision for bilingual bonuses to be provided as a non-pension based dollar amount instead of percentage of salary.
Well, Ms. Cooper, what do you have to say about this?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Representing the CAO's office. What we have before you is an ordinance amending 2 sections of the administrative code, and this is for non-represented employees, and this follows an instruction from the city council to do this. And as the clerk summarized, basically it changes 2 things. One is it changes the current bilingual bonus from a percentage to a flat cash amount. It changes the, for either writing or speaking, previously for non-reps, it was 2.75%.
Of your paycheck.
Of your pay, correct. Now it would be $25 biweekly. If you do both, if you write and speak, this is how we commonly refer to it, instead of being 5.5%, it would be $50.
So we're going to save money and still give them compensation for their abilities.
Correct, and it equalizes it as well, because this way everybody using a bilingual skill gets the same amount of money regardless of the person's base pay.
And how many folks do we have in the city collecting bilingual pay?
Well, this is only affecting non-represented employees. To change this for represented would have to be negotiated, but currently it's a very small group because there's very few number of non-represented employees anyway. It's less than 1,000 employees. But according to the PACER run, there are, let's see, 3, 6, looks like, wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 employees currently receiving bilingual pay.
Okay. And how often do they have to use that in order to be compensated? For example, they're working a counter and then they get promoted. For example, Tom Coltis, who's now in the executive position, but he started out as a counter, speaking to residents, clients, etc. Do they continue to receive that no matter what their position is, or is it based upon their requirement to utilize that with the folks that they deal with?
The latter. It's based on the position, not the person. So it's if you are in a position that requires that you use your bilingual skills.
So Mr. Coltis would not be permitted as he promotes?
Unless he promoted to a position where his bilingual skills would be necessary, whatever those bilingual skills might be.
I have enough trouble with English.
Enough trouble with English. So like in the police command, while they're not talking
Again, we're
directly.
dealing with non-represented.
No, I know, but I'm trying to make
yeah.
a comparison. You start out as an officer, you're getting bilingual bonus, you speak a foreign language, you promote to detective, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, now you're a captain, you're a commander. Are you still, under this process, still receiving that, or is there a review to say you're no longer eligible for that?
You would only receive it if the position was designated as being qualified to receive it. So if you promoted into a position that did not have a bilingual bonus associated with it, you would not get it. It doesn't follow the person, it's with the position.
Well, I understand that, but I think with the police department, it follows the person, not the position. Once you get it, it's kind of like you're locked into it.
Yeah, can't.
Well, it's okay, because we're going to do a motion to find that out, Mr. Perry. We're going to find out, because how many of the departments have bilingual bonuses?
I don't know that information. off
Well, the
top-
10 folks we're
top of my
talking
head.
about, do they represent a number of departments?
They are, I don't have the information in front of me, what departments those employees are in.
So I know we're only talking 10 people, but the potential here, especially on a percentage of your salary, you're a captain of police versus an officer on the street, you're talking about a great difference in that salary, and that 2% on the street level is one issue, 2% on the top level is a huge amount of money.
I don't think. they
Z's
assign
trying to think about this,
bilingual-
huh?
I don't think they assign bilingual above detective in the PD.
Well, we need to follow-
but
we
will
need to-
check that for sure.
That's another way to save some money to help the city budget.
And it's in their MOU, which we would have to negotiate. But one of the reasons for doing this was to set this as the new standard in the city.
No, I like the idea. I'm not,
Set it here, and then as MOUs come open, we will negotiate this.
well, I think it's a great idea. I just know that you compensate someone for their ability at the same time. While they're using that, they're compensated, and it just seems to be a fair balance. I just want to make sure that we're doing it for the folks that are actually using it and not going up the ladder into administrative positions. I'm only using Tom as an example, but I know that in the police department, there's a lot of folks that get, because of the diversity of Los Angeles, a lot of different language bonuses for a lot of different folks. And you got to take a test to get that. But whether it's Farsi or Spanish or Korean or Japanese,
Right,
or whatever
you
the
have to be
case may be.
certified by personnel department, correct?
Right. So, Mr. Perry, look into that. I don't know if you need a motion, but let's look into that.
I don't think so. The answer is that it's determined in each MOU bargaining decision, and so this action only deals with the non-represented.
No, I understand that, but I'm talking about how high up. That's what I'm concerned about.
That's each MOU is done separately.
Well, we're going to look into that.
What's at the time the MOU is brought forward.
Exactly. But I want to figure that out since they're going to be coming up soon. Mr. Corrett.
Look at all the MO.
I want to look at all of them. I want to make sure that it's appropriate for the people who are using it, and it's not just carry it with you.
We can send back a report on how bilingual is distributed across.
You can do that?
bargaining units, yeah.
All right, let's do that. Because it could be nothing, it could be something, but it could potentially be a lot of money. Mr. Paul Koretz.
My only question isn't about the bilingual, it's about the 40 hours and overtime. How carefully have we looked at the legality of not providing overtime when someone's sick or when there's a holiday or when they're furloughed or whatever the categories are, to require that they actually work the 40 hours before overtime is assessed?
Well, actually, this ordinance amendment change puts us in conformance with how it is stated right now in the Fair Labor Standard Act. The Fair Labor Standard Act, FLSA, overtime is based on hours worked. We were actually more generous in the city. It was negotiated that way, and the non-reps just sort of followed the practice we had for represented employees. So this actually takes the strict definition in the FLSA and applies it to the non-represented employees.
So under that law, you're not there for Martin Luther King Day because it's a day off, and so you work 32 hours that week. So that the holiday doesn't apply under current law, but not under our existing practice.
Right. Our existing practice is you would count all compensated time in a week, in a 40-hour week. So correct. So what we're doing here for non-represented employees is if an employee did not work Martin Luther King holiday and had it off and was there for 32 hours but worked 2 hours later on one day and worked 34 hours, would not get overtime.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure whether that was a legal thing to do or not, but
Yes.
I'll take your assurance that
Yes.
We're on solid
Definitely
ground.
legal.
When the Z-woman
In
nods,
fact, it's
it's
the
a wrap.
standard.
The Z-woman's nodding, it means it's correct. So she's done her research. Okay, so we have a motion to approve number one?
Somewhat reluctantly, but yes.
Which part, the first or second?
I mean, both of it probably applies in such small instances that it probably doesn't save us that much money. But I think at this point, we're in such bad financial shape that if it helps us avoid laying off 3/4 of a person, I mean, everything's a step in the right direction, so.
And then it will set the standard for the other language bonuses and the other aspects.
Exactly. Sometimes we're in a position where we can start with the non-reps in this case.
Now, council staff, let's consider non-rep.
Yes,
Yes.
the council aides, yes,
They're non-rep, but they're at will.
right, both,
So this would apply to them.
yes.
Because on the 40 hours, they're salaried employees. They don't get overtime.
This applies, let me just clarify. This applies to hourly employees.
Okay, well,
The
staff is on,
FLSA non-exempt
okay.
employees.
So our staff would be different because they're salary, no matter how many hours they work.
Yeah, I don't know if any of our staff have bilingual bonuses.
No,
I doubt it.
no, they don't. They just do that as goodness of their heart to make themselves more valuable. Okay, so reluctantly from you and affirmative from me, so it passes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next item, please.
On item 2, the Community Development Department has requested an exemption of 48 grant-funded positions. This is for various divisions within Community Development Department, and the Civil Service Commission has recommended approval.
Exemption of 48 grant-funded positions. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Does this follow the mayor's directive on assigning people to grant and other positions?
Well, these are actually a continuation. We need to come back and get new exemptions for these 48 positions. They're continued in the annual plan. They're in our PAR.
But this hasn't been approved by the mayor's office with the, what's that thing called, Tom? Managed hiring.
This is not a request to hire these people. This
Just
is a
continue it.
request to continue their grant-funded
But
exemption.
but are there folks in all these positions right now?
There's one vacant position. It's the program aide that's assigned to East LA.
Because I understand what we're trying to do is the folks who are being removed from the workforce because of the budget, trying to find them positions at special fund, grant fund,
Correct.
proprietary. Would this fall into that category?
Yes.
The one?
Yeah.
And the rest of them are all grant. Now, is the grant taking care of all the compensation?
Yes. Full cost recovery for each position.
Pension, medical, everything? So, sir, you are?
Jaime Pacheco Orozco with the Community Development Department.
Okay. So how are we going to fill that position that's currently vacant?
Well, we put it up for, well, the instruction that we had received from the CAO was that there were to be no new members onto the retirement system, onto LACERS. So
Right.
we would then advertise it through a citywide transfer, open it up to any current program aide and a different department grant-funded position. If they would like to come over and interview for the opportunity to work for CDD, it's entirely grant-funded, we would consider them for that position.
And how long does this grant go for?
There are multiple grants that we receive through the Community Development Department.
On this particular, we're talking about these 48 people. I mean, is there long-term or short-term?
These are long-term positions.
And the money's coming from what source?
Workforce Investment Act,
That's federal.
federal dollars.
They're still paying for that.
They're still paying for that, sir.
We're trying to place as many people as we can to keep them out of the unemployment lines.
And CDD, just so you know, actually participated in that program. We hired, since February 14th, 16 employees who came over from general funded positions. We took them, put them into our grant-funded positions.
Okay,
We're
good.
actually taking another person on March 15th.
And what's the average salary for these positions?
I didn't calculate the average salary, but to give you an idea, the senior project coordinators At step 5 are 93,124. The project coordinators are 78,362. Senior project assistant, 65,166. So it, they kind of vary based
That's nice.
on the class.
That's fair compensation?
Hey, silly question. What exactly are these folks being exempted from?
Civil service provisions. There's an exemption in the city charter that specifically allows for grant-funded positions that are expected to last for 2 years and it can be extended an additional year for a period of 3 years. And it's so that you don't have a situation where you hire and lay off and hire and lay off. So you're exempted for that reason from the civil service provisions of the charter.
Thank you.
Okay. And they serve, as it states here, different parts of the city. So, for example, a senior project assistant in South Valley, what would they be doing?
We've regionalized our office, Councilmember, into 5 different parts of the city. So we've actually outstationed folks at different parts of the city. The program personnel attached to these grants would focus particularly on the grant activities. So in the South Valley, for example, if it was a WIA-funded activity, they would provide, I stutter, so bear with me. They would be providing direct services to participants who come through our centers. So a good bulk of these folks are case managers. We do employment training services for participants.
So a wide variety of activities.
Correct.
And what's the forecast for the continuing funding for these type?
Actually, it's fairly good. The interesting thing is that we do well on federal and state grants when the economy doesn't do well, primarily because we're trying to address the economic situation that's confronting the city. So as Michael had indicated, we have hired additional staff to address the potential layoffs in the public sector, both at the city, county, and public educational institutions. So we do receive additional funding to address those.
But the message is someone's got to be in Lacers, which means they have to be a city employee.
Correct.
In order to get a position.
Right.
That way we're sure that we have the people there. Okay. Any other questions?
Nope. That's it.
Approval? Without objection, we approve number 2. Number 3, please.
On item 3, the Personnel Department has submitted a report relative to employee development and training programs offered to city employees during fiscal year 2008-2009.
Hello.
Hi, Raylan Napper, Personnel Department. This report reflects training courses and services provided by the Personnel Department, training and development opportunities departments provided to their own employees, mandated training required of departments in their respective compliance, and the Personnel Department's response to a council motion regarding executive training program. I'd like to briefly recap each category for you. For the Personnel Department, through our regular repertoire of classroom training, specialized classes, and services, the Personnel Department provided training to approximately 8,000 employees, which represents 17% of the workforce. This was a 67% decrease from the prior fiscal year. The training of 8,000 employees resulted in 9,101 training transactions, which is a 64% decrease from the prior fiscal year. Last year, we reported an anticipated decrease of about 50% or more, and this decrease is, a large part of it is due to our mandated sexual harassment training, which is every 2 years. This year was an off year, 08-09. Late calendar year 07, late calendar year 09 is when we train the bulk of our supervisors. Additionally, we suspended classroom training around this time last year and discontinued 3 courses from the regular catalog. For department-sponsored training, every year the Personnel Department surveys city departments in order to report all training activities throughout the city. 34 departments and bureaus offered 10,054 instances of training to 173,968 employees. I have to note in the report, the number 18422 is inaccurate. It's 173, about 174,000. And that's sworn and civilian. Additionally, 12 departments provided tuition reimbursement to 2,476 employees. This year is the first year, I believe, we've reported mandated training required of departments. 34 departments reported that throughout the city there are 214 mandated courses. Citywide, we're in compliance with 150, which is 70%. Non-compliant was 64, which is 30%. And attachment 3 details every course and each department's explanation for why they're out of compliance. For the most part, it's people being on leave, or it's just a continual program, so they're always catching up. In response to the council motion in 2009 regarding inquiring about a single master contract for executive level training, meaning AGM and above, the personnel department surveyed all city departments regarding this program. 22 responded. 4 are already providing this type of training, 1 through using a personal service contract, the other 3 are in-house. Everyone was interested, of course, but cited a lack of funds as being an inhibitor to the program. Nonetheless, we have similar things that are available. The Future Focused Leadership Program for Chief MA and above, for those people represented in MOU 36, provides a similar kind of training. Also, we have a pre-approved training vendor list that there are 11 vendors on there, hundreds of courses. Any department can contract with them and select their training. In the last fiscal year, we only had 1 department participate with that and contracted with 5 different vendors.
These are general fund departments, not the proprietary?
Right, this is just general funded. That's the summary of the report in a nutshell.
Personnel department conducted 2 first aid CPR classes for Homeland Security staff. 19 employees were trained. I understand that there's a requirement by law that certain city employees need to have first aid training on a regular schedule,
Yes.
and I don't know if that's being done. We may be in violation of the law.
Right. I think there are some departments that are not in compliance with that training.
Like police department,
That might be one.
Ms. Lyons. You're in compliance, I hope.
Let's see.
Well, somebody's got to save us. And the concern is if there's a law that says you have to have this and we're not in compliance, the state could come in and take more money out of our city treasury.
Could be, yes. Fine us for it.
Of course, they'd have to have someone to do the enforcement, and since they're in as bad shape as we are, there's probably nobody there doing the oversight.
That might
But
be-
then there's liability if we don't have trained personnel and someone has a medical emergency, and then we can get sued on the other end because we're supposed to be trained for it. So your sheet, you have an extensive list there.
I do. Personnel and police are in compliance with CPR.
Personnel and who's not in compliance?
I don't have the breakdown by course. It's only by department, so I'd have to look.
What I'd like to do, Mr. Perry, is those departments that are not in compliance, have them report to this committee along with you and make sure they get in compliance. Because if there's a law that says they have to be in compliance, we open the city up to liability. If we're not providing that training and something were to occur, then we're liable. And I know that city liability is a major issue for us. So let's continue this matter and have those departments that are not in compliance, have them come to this committee. And also, we should probably have risk management from the city attorney's office, inform them of the liability they're holding over the city of Los Angeles. Because they just don't have the option not to do that. Because you send out the notice, the law's affected, and they just don't care. Well, we'll make them care. Okay, so let's, number 3, we will continue. How long do you think till we can get them on the carpet here?
we can get a list of the departments and then determine the soonest that they'd all be available to come.
Okay, so can work with Mr. Perry on that, so
Okay.
we'll see you back here when we make sure they get their job done. So we're going to continue number 4. You get the further information. Thank you very much. I mean, number 3. We're continuing number 3. Now we're up to number 4.
And item 4 was before you is a motion, and this was introduced by Mr. Parks and Mr. Weiser. And this is instructing the general managers of the Los Angeles City Retirement System, Fire and Police Pension System, and the Department of Water and Power to conduct an overall assessment of the March 26 League of Women Voters report relative to city retirement benefits, and to report back on the feasibility of implementing the options outlined in that report. This matter has also been referred to Budget and Finance Committee.
Sally, don't hide back there. Mike, come on up. Possible options for modifying the system, should be evaluated. Motion to start the general managers. Assess the league's report. Well, what do you think? Let's start with Sally.
Hi, Sally Choi, General Manager of the Los Angeles City Employees Retirement System, and I'm here with Tom Maudis. In response to this motion, we did submit a letter to both committees here at in Personnel as well as the Budget and Finance Committee, and I don't know if it got transmitted to you in time, so I don't know if it's included in the file.
No, it's not.
Okay, well, I'll just kind of outline what we said in our letter, which is basically LACER's role is to be the administrator of the retirement benefits, so we don't engage in the design of any type of retirement benefits except to provide you with the resources that you need and the information that you need. So we're here to provide you with some technical information based on what was proposed or recommended in the League of Women Voters report. One of the things that was identified in that report was the possibility of closing down what we have is a defined benefit plan. A defined benefit plan is one in which you have a retirement benefit that's based on a formula. So it's based on your age, your years of service, and a benefit factor. In the case of LACER's, it's 2.16% for every year of service. So your retirement allowance is based on that formula, which is then guaranteed for your lifetime.
That percent was 2.16?
2.16 is for a normal retirement, and to get a normal retirement at LACER's, you would have to be age 55 with at least 30 years of service, age 60 with 10 years of continuous service, or 70 years of age in order to get that formula. So that's a defined benefit plan where it's pretty much a predefined benefit that you get through your lifetime based on what your combination of years and final compensation is, your salary. Now, what's been proposed is to close that down and provide instead a defined contribution plan, which is essentially a 401k type plan. So for defined contribution plan, there is no defined set allowance amount. It's basically an account that's created where you put in contributions from the employer or the employee that gets invested. You have control over those assets of how you want to invest that money, so it's more volatile. The value of that account would be very risky. It would be sensitive to whatever the market conditions are, depending on how you've invested that money. So basically, when you retire, what you get is whatever's in that account. So there's no set guaranteed amount that you would get. It's really dependent on how well your account or your portfolio has done.
So it's like the Las Vegas account. You roll the dice and you make money, and you roll the dice and you lose money.
Right. Well, it could fluctuate. It could go depending on when you retire. It could be really good, or it could be not enough. And that's the difference between a defined benefit and defined contribution.
But who decides where that money goes? You decide as
right. It's member controlled, or it depends on how the city were to design it.
But most of our members aren't that sophisticated when it comes to investment.
That is correct.
So it would be a negative for them to get involved in something like that.
Potentially, it's similar to how you would manage your deferred comp plan, your deferred comp account.
And there's a lot of people who've lost money in deferred comp accounts. because they took these investments that thought they'd make a lot of money,
Right.
and they lost a lot of money.
That's right. And we do have a report that our consulting actuary performed back in 2005. I don't know if you remember, few years ago, there were 3 different initiatives statewide that was being proposed, 1 a ballot initiative and 2 in the legislature. So we did an analysis of that particular proposal. So some of the numbers aren't going to necessarily apply here, but the general concept was there are some issues or concerns with investment returns, both on the person, because as you said, it is riskier because you don't know exactly how well your investments are going to perform. But there is also impact to the system. For LACERs, by closing down a defined benefit plan, you would radically alter our cash flow relationship between contributions and the benefits paid. So this would warrant us to require a reassessment of how we invest our money and what kind of assumptions we can assume going forward. Because now all that money that was going into our defined benefit plan would no longer go in there. It would then all that money would go into the defined contribution plans, which is more individual specific. So that would affect kind of our investment return assumptions. Also, we would have some issues in terms of how we calculate our amortization of our existing unfunded liabilities, because again, the pool of assets would shrink because we're not adding to it, and yet the liability is still there. There are also other issues with defined contribution plans, which is it doesn't provide disability benefits, it doesn't provide survivor continuance, it doesn't necessarily provide other types of ancillary benefits that you would normally expect in a defined benefit plan. So one could probably, if you provided a 401k type plan, there would be separate types of negotiations, I would presume, to cover those other areas. One of the reasons why those issues failed was because some of these benefits weren't covered. And then the other issue that you mentioned is really about lower investment returns on individually managed accounts. They're not as sophisticated, they're not investment professionals, so they're not going to be able to make as much money as our investment managers who are specialists in these areas.
And they still lost money being specialists.
That's right. And because the market is so volatile, you never know. It changes day by day, and some days it changes by the hour. There's also leakage issues because individuals would have some control over how they want to use that money, and maybe they may not use it to provide for sufficient retirement when they retire. So you have those issues. Market volatility, as we talked about, and it's more difficult to really manage from a HR perspective with the 401k type plan. And then what the study also found was that in our particular case, it wouldn't necessarily save money or save the city's contributions in the initial years because of the way that we fund our benefits here at LACERS, which is very age-specific or age-sensitive. So, depending on what the specific provisions would be that the city would consider, it could, in the longer term, lower the city's contributions, but it would really depend on the overall design. Some other things that the League of Women Voters report talked about were other areas that could be modified. And these are typical cost drivers that you see considered whenever you look at benefits design for retirement. One is the retirement age. So the idea is here they recommend a higher retirement age. As I mentioned, ours is 55 if you have 30, or age 60 with 10 years. The concept is the higher the retirement age, the lower the cost, because for one, you will have, as the plan sponsor, longer time to invest money and longer time for us to fund those benefits. And the other idea is that it would require shorter payout after retirement. So we delay your retirement. If you retire at 65, there's some life expectancy assumptions. So you would have, few years that you would actually have to pay out in retirement is kind of the concept.
In other words, the longer they work, the shorter they live to retire. So you make out.
Right.
Now,
But
to change that legally, we can't do that, I presume, for current workers.
that's right. And what they're proposing is a new tier. So if you establish a new tier, that would, have a higher retirement age requirement.
But you're saying it doesn't save money for the city.
It does. It does in the sense that, you would have more time to invest that money, so presumably we would make money on that. And so higher investment earnings means lower employer contributions. So it will help alleviate potentially.
Plus, you're not paying them for 5 years.
Right, and the average life expectancy after retirement is about 20 years. So people are living longer, which is a
See,
good
I've got
thing.
8 retired, so I got 12 left.
But you're still working.
Yeah, I'm not sure this is
It doesn't apply
anyone's
for
real idea of retirement. We're probably working
That's
harder
true.
now.
I don't know if this is retirement.
If you retire twice, do you get 40 years out?
I wouldn't laugh, Phyllis. You're close behind. What?
We're doing a countdown for
You count that.
Yeah, they're counting.
Thank you.
But this would apply, and these recommendations were being proposed if you maintained a defined benefit plan. This wouldn't really apply in the case of defined contribution. Defined contribution or 401k plan, it doesn't matter how old you are. It's just totally based on what's in your account and when you decide to retire.
So what is your recommendation as the administrator of Lacers?
Well, that's not really for me to say. It really comes down to what do you want as an employer? What kind of workforce do you want to have? Do you want people to work longer? And are there certain types of classifications or people that you're trying to attract and retain? So depending on, let's say, IT professionals or attorneys, some of them, personnel would have that information as far as what's their average age coming in and how long do you want them to actually work for the city. The other thing that you would have to look at is, do you want to reward long-term service? Those are the things that you'd have to look at. It's not really for us to say. We can give you the data. We can tell you based on our current benefits that the average age at retirement is 60. So based on the numbers we're actually seeing now, the average age of service at retirement is about 26 and a half years. So that kind of gives you some understanding of what's happening, on a year-to-year basis.
But my philosophy with government employment is you're working for the people. They're paying the salary, the benefits, but you're dedicated to the population that you're serving, whether you're working in the public safety arena or the executive level or engineering, building buildings or sanitation, whatever the case may be, looking at it as a career versus I worked at this place, I worked at that place, and I worked at this place, and I put in for Social Security. I've always viewed civil employment, civilian versus the civil service, as a commitment to the people, and the payback was you have a pension, you have benefits, but there's that loyalty clause that the taxpayers are paying for your salary and benefits, and you're providing a service to them. You're not going to be rich, but the fact is you're going to be comfortable, or you're supposed to be, based upon your compensation package. And that was the draw to civil service and to the pension system when you join at whatever age. So I know you look at around this room, so I have very honorable 42 years of service with my police time and the council time. I mean, to me, that's a long-term commitment. And I think June Gibson exceeds that. Because she started as a student worker at 15. So when I look at that aspect, it's not like when you go to the state legislature, you go there for 6 years as a legislator and then you're gone. Unless you want to run for Senate, then you're gone. And they've taken away the benefit package for any type of retirement. I look at this as an incentive to recruit qualified people with the civil service system to make sure you're getting competent, qualified folks to serve the public. It's not that 8 to 5 job and I'm going home. So, I mean, that's always been my philosophy. So maybe that's not everyone's philosophy, but I personally, I know that they're getting more and more away. They're getting drawn away from the defined benefit going through the defined contribution. That seems to be the trend, but I think that it's adverse to people who are really committed to the municipality. Now, Calpers, that would be also a defined benefit, the Calpers system?
Calpers, right. Most municipalities and state governments all provide a defined benefit plan. You are seeing some, there was a trend and now it's kind of waned a little bit, but then it's being discussed again, is what they call a hybrid plan. The feds have this. So you have a defined benefit plan, So maybe it doesn't cover as much of a retirement, maybe it's 75% your final compensation or capped at some lower level. But then they supplement that with a 401k or 457 plan, so you can add to it, and there would be an employer match or, so that to get you to whatever you think is an appropriate replacement income, because that's the kind of the philosophy in retirement is what's the appropriate replacement income for you to have a, successful life after retirement. Is
So-
it 80% of your salary or
But
something? Or
Based upon your compensation, you started out at, say, making $40,000. Now you're making $300,000. We're now at the Lacers, the pension contribution is what percent?
For employees?
For
For employees, it's 6% of pay if
It
you were
used to be-
hired after 1983.
It used to be 2%.
Well, for people that are hired before 1983, on average, it's about 2% because the city was picking up the rest.
So now
Just to be
it's-
clear, though, they originally were paying 6%, but in one particular year, instead of getting a 4% cost of living increase like the Sworn got, they deferred or defrayed 4%
Well,
contribution.
actually-
So they pay 2% contribution up till that change was made
Okay.
very
But
recently.
actually, it wasn't 6%. It's pre-1983. It was age-based. So depending on how old you were, you would have a different contribution rate. So for some people, as high as 12% of pay.
So the older
or
you are,
8% of pay.
the less
Yes.
you'd pay? Okay.
No. The older
You
you
make
are,
more?
the more you pay.
The more you pay,
Because the idea is you're not going to be working as long.
so grab it while we can.
Yeah.
So our current standard, I know that we changed it. Our current is 6%?
Current is 6%, but under
For everyone.
ERIP, with the adoption of ERIP,
Now it's
everyone's
7%.
contribution will go up to 7%.
And then the retired folks have to give 1% of their pension back under ERIP.
Well, not 1% back. It's 1% off of the enhancement that they were getting.
Yeah, but anyway, we get 1% of that somehow.
And that's with the exception of Group 4 that was a cash-only benefit.
Right. And so there's different formulas, but, so if you're making $300,000 a year, you're paying 6%. If you're making $50,000 a year, you're paying 6% into the Lacer pension plan. You're paying that percentage out of your check. And then you're gonna.
I'm sorry.
So if you're making $300,000, you're paying 6%. If you're making $50,000, you're paying 6%.
Right. Regardless of how much you're getting paid, it's the same percentage. It's what's
Okay.
6% of your
Salary,
Right.
okay. And then when you retire under the current provision, you get 2.16%.
No, so those are two different concepts. 6% is what you're paying in now to fund your future benefit.
And my future benefit would be,
So when you retire, let's say you get normal retirement, then your final allowance, your retirement allowance would be the number of years of service in Lacers. So let's say just for,
say, 12 years.
12 years, and your final compensation is, let's say your highest salary, 12-month salary is $100,000, and the benefit factor is 2.16.
That's right.
So we will do 2.16 times your 12 years will get you the percentage. And then you apply that percentage to your salary to then get your.
Okay, that's what I understand. So I personally like that plan because I think it is easier for the employee to not have to worry about investments, since most of the folks that we have are not stock experts. And if they are stock experts, maybe they're exception to the rule. Not to show any disrespect to them, but they're just not in that financial arena. And the fact is, I know people that went into defined contribution and they've lost everything they had, and now they cry in the blues because they jumped out of a plan that was somewhat secure and safe. That's what I look at as the benefit, and I keep on saying defined contribution, defined benefit. Defined benefit gives me that safety, that security. But the League of Women Voters is encouraging us to go another direction, and I'm not so inclined to do that as a policymaker for our employees. Now, have the unions been consulted about this?
I believe the CAO's office, and I defer to Tom Coltis, that's been discussed with them, but we would agree that the defined contribution would not provide you the security that you would get under a defined benefit plan, but their proposal is really looking at if your objective is to reduce costs, then the different factors that you would want to modify in order to reduce that liability would be in the areas of retirement age, would be in the areas of your benefit factor. So you can have a sliding scale on the benefit factor. Let's say the maximum could be 2.16, but the fewer years of service you have, the lower the benefit factor. There are different ways that can be designed. similar to what Calpers has and some other systems have.
And this will be for all future employees?
Yeah, you could do something like that. The other one is instead of 12 months final comp, what's been suggested here is a 3-year final comp, which is what we used to have at Lacers. It was 3 years final comp, and it was changed at some point. And then the other area is cost of living adjustments. You know, retirees get COLAs. So under our current plan, it's a 3% COLA plus a bank. So if CPI exceeds 3%, you get that excess in a bank. So you can draw down on that in those years where CPI is less than 3%. You'd always, be able to get 3% COLA. So if the objective is to reduce, costs, these are the areas that you'd want to look at, but you'd want to also balance that against, again, what you want to offer as an employer to be able to recruit and retain employees.
Mike.
I'm Mike Perez, General Manager of Fire and Police Pensions. This is Bill Raggio, Assistant General Manager in charge of Pensions Division. The issues we have are very similar to Lacers with respect to the recommendations made by the League of Women Voters. I would like to echo what Sally said, though, about defined contribution plans in terms of the participants making less money than the professional managers would make. The studies that I've seen, they make about 1% less, which is really significant over a person's lifetime. In the event that they have, there's a market downturn, they lose a significant part of their assets later in life, they may not be ready to retire. If they're not ready to retire and cannot work, then the government's going to bail them out. So there could be some potential big costs down the line in that respect. With respect to the recommendations made by the League, I've put together a board report that's going to my board tomorrow, and it's in some ways we're being very careful about this because the employee unions generally are at our board meetings. These are policy matters that the League has recommended, and we want to be very careful about the position we take, or position I take as the general manager, making sure that the board concurs with it. One point, though, and so I'm available to answer questions that you have, particularly about our pension system, but one point that I would like to make is that the League of Women Voters did not look at the Department of Water and Power retirement system. The city is except for maybe the fire and police departments with the sworn people there, we're a training ground for water and power. They take our best people and they offer them more money with a richer retirement system, better health benefits. I think that's something that ought to be looked at very carefully in the context of the cost of these tremendous losses that we have. In our system alone, we lost about 10% of our people to the DWP retirement system. Investment officers, senior clerk typists, management analysts, the whole gamut, because they're paid more over there and they have a richer retirement system. Their factor, where Lacers is 2.16, the water and power retirement system factor is 2.3%. They have better health plans for their retirees as well. So I want to encourage you to look at that, even though the League of Women Voters dismissed that because the water and power system is not a general fund obligation of the city.
What about airport, harbor?
They're in Lacers, except for the sworn people in the harbor in our plans.
And CRA?
They're, I believe,
part
Social
of
Security.
CalPERS?
Yeah.
Okay.
How much of a difference do you think that makes? I mean, what?
The 2.3?
Losses to water and power? Or
No, I mean the fact that their pension is a richer pension system. How does that impact everybody else?
the impact to the rest of the city, which would include many of the engineering departments that have engineers that are preyed on by water and power, is that they lose staff to a system that pays better. The water and power pays more to their people, and the retirement plan they have is a better plan. So there's two things that are very significant there. We have common civil service classifications. It makes it easier for them to go back and forth. And we have reciprocity between the two systems. Really facilitates their going back and forth easily as well. Sally may want to comment on it, but this is something I've seen throughout my career in the city. I've worked actually at Water and Power for 6 months. I've been here in the city since 1980, and I've seen people go back and forth, but generally they go over to Water and Power.
So when they get to retire, they go to Water and Power, so they get, so when they get, they're here, they get 2.16. They go to Water and Power the last 2 years, that 2.16 would turn into 2.3?
Right, but only after a certain age.
Right.
It's not across the board. So I think it's after,
It's if they have 55 years of age and 30 years of service.
right.
And they won't live long after that, according to
Right,
statistics.
but bear in mind, right now, you are encouraging
live
people to
long
transfer to DWP.
We are?
Yes, to take general fund positions.
We are.
And also, you know,
I mean, we are.
to Mike's point, I know the CAO's office has already recommended changes to the DWP system, as I think have been reported before.
Well, I know this was brought up in the ERC, the pension system with the police, fire, and I can't give confidential information out to Z-Woman, but we have discussed it in the ERC for discussion to come up with some cost savings, I will say that. So the bottom line is, legal women voters is looking at one angle to save money. It would save some money, but then again, is that going to sacrifice the career employees, or will it bypass them? By the way, I wanted to ask, how funded are we now?
We're around 91% funded, but I would like to make a point that the League of Women Voters did not.
Oh, and Sally, where are you guys at?
On an actuarial value of assets basis for retirement benefits, we're 81.6%. And also, just to remind you, we pre-fund our retiree health benefits, which most systems do not. That is at 67% funded. So overall, we have funded ratio of about 79.4%. Now, these are preliminary numbers because this does not include the ERIP cost, which will be, this report will be updated later this month.
But you guys are doing well, and your investment people have done well.
Well, we did horribly. When, you know, and we were at our height at 16.7 billion. Now we're at about 12.7. So on a market basis, we're way below where we were. One of the reasons that we maintain that high funding status is because the way we smooth our assets over a 5-year period. So as time goes forward, if we continue to ride up with this market right now, we're going to make up for those losses, and we'll get that return back, and it will justify that high 91% funded ratio. But if we don't make it up, then the smoothing that we do is going to catch up with us, and our funding ratio will go down, and city contributions will go up.
Now, why are we anticipating such huge city contributions in the next couple of years?
Because
I'm sorry. Well, because the market in the last few years has not been good to us. We had a 4.5% loss a couple years back. Last year was 18% loss. Those are very significant to us, but we did not take the full impact of those losses in terms of how we value our assets. We smooth our assets over a five-year period so that we don't have big fluctuations in the city's contribution. It really makes a lot of sense to do that, because otherwise, if we have a big hit in the market, the city's contribution is going to go way up the next year. Likewise, if we go way up in the market, the city's contribution will go down. We don't want that. We want as much as possible to have stable contributions coming in from the city.
So what do you, okay, so if you're making money, say you're at 100% funded, your returns are coming in great, you're 100%.
All right.
How much does the city have to give you a percentage?
There's something called the normal cost percentage. If we're 100% funded, I believe that percent is about 8% right now. So that's 8% of payroll. Okay, and payroll for us is probably 1.2 billion. It might be less.
So we'd pay 8% out of the general fund to the pension for the police and fire.
That's the normal cost percent. But then there's right now, because we're not 100% funded, we pay this unfunded percent. So we have that, the pension percent, as well as the health funding that the city does as well. And there's an unfunded as part of that. This year, we expect the city contribution for this past year was $350 million. For next year, we expect it to be around $382. Now,
what happens when we run out of money? Does the pension get funded before bonds paid, before employees are paid?
That's a very good question.
it's a general obligation. It's in the charter for us. I don't know about Lacey.
So pensions would be paid
but
first.
so is bond payments too. So that is a major question.
Z-Woman,
We need to get our pension attorneys to address that issue.
because I understand pensions come before payroll for active employees.
We're not sure. This hasn't really been tested in the courts, even in municipalities where there have been bankruptcies.
Don't say that word in this room, please.
I know. In those cases where,
It's the bad
you
one.
know, cities were struggling with their budgets and not able to meet its obligations, they did continue their contributions to pension systems, but, you know, depending on what any particular employer's situation is, if they're unable to pay, I don't know where we stand. And that is the question for our fiduciary council, is what would happen in that case? Where does the pension plans stack up against bondholders? And employees' contracts.
Mike, do you know?
No, I'd have to defer to the attorneys as well. I would like to make one point, though, and that is we manage right now 6 tiers, 6 different pension plans that have been developing since around 1925. Okay? And the reason for
Article 17, 18, 35.
tiers, yeah. 17, 18, 35, then Article 35, Plan 2, those were all changed to tiers. Now there's 5 tiers. There's also the Article 11 and a half of the city charter. We call them fluctuators. They get half of whatever the person who retired, they get half of whatever that rank of that person was. So if a person retired as a sergeant, their surviving spouse gets half of whatever a current active sergeant gets. There's only about 20 or 30 of those left, but that's still one of our plans. The point I'm making, though, is in good times, benefits were increased for our members. And that the first time I have a record of that happening was 1911. The city council had the ability to change the benefits for police and fire, and they did it. I believe they put in they got rid of an age requirement. They could retire 20 years of service, and there was no age requirement. And you see that happening over the years. In bad times, the benefits were scaled back.
So we've gone through this cycle before.
Yes, and
Bless you in the audience.
And I guess the point I got there is that, you know, the League of Women Voters, you know, they did a pretty good study here, but what they didn't do is involve the employee organizations. And that really is the role of the Employee Relations Division of CAO. They're the ones that are going to get all the parties together, including an actuary, hopefully to cost out these proposals that are being made and come up with a tier that's going to make sense for the long term.
But can't we make changes to a pension plan for future employees without consulting the representative bargaining units because those people haven't been paid, they haven't been hired? So I don't know how the bargaining units would have any say. If you affect current employees, I can understand. But if you're going to impact future employees, the union's not representing those folks, so why would they have a say at the table? I don't know if they'd agree with that, but I think logical.
I think
it's a gray legal question at best.
But from a practical standpoint, without consulting them, then you're facing a fight and a battle, because for us, it's a charter change. And to get it on the charter, it's going to take discussion before the city council. The next ballot that's going to go before the voters is March of 2010. Okay, so if you want to modify the safety systems, the city council has provided direction to the city attorney. I think it's the first or second week of November, this November. So there's got to be discussion, agreement on what to put on the ballot, and then some direction to the city attorney. That's got to be done by November. The next one after that is May of 2011. So it's got that ballot measure has got to be approved by city council, give direction to city attorney, January of 2011.
That's for police and fire, but
That's right.
the Lacers is done by ordinance.
That's correct.
That's correct. We're getting a little bit off topic, but there have been
We are?
city attorney opinions relative to what the meet and confer obligations are as to new hires, whether it's meet and confer or meet and consult. And those opinions are in writing. They're obviously privileged communications, but they've been provided to the CAO as well as to EERC.
I don't know, we're off the topic. We're talking about pensions.
Well, we're getting a little astray when we start talking about ballot measures and what.
Oh, that
we
was
have a
Mike. I didn't bring
specific
that up.
agenda item
Mr.
here.
Perez, Mr. Perez,
We're talking about lacers
But in
and
terms
the
of
women.
how
I
they-
see one was
League of
going to
Women
challenge you
Voters.
now.
That's okay. That's happened to me many times.
Yeah. But it does goes to the
She's
question
always
of how,
challenging me anyway, so don't feel
how you
bad.
would implement changes.
So, okay. So what we do is we send this to council,
It's going to budget and finance also.
and then it goes to the council.
March 10th, I believe.
I just think it opens up a real, I know the pension contribution is an issue. I know Mr. Richmond has a ballot measure.
That's dead.
Oh, it died? Oh, it
They
did.
don't
Oh, you're
have
kidding.
backing.
Interesting.
They don't have backing for it.
Didn't know that.
Schwarzenegger and Whitman announced the other day they weren't going to back it, and we're going to take it off the ballot. So that's my understanding. That was announced about a week ago.
So what we do would go to budget and finance, go to council. Council will make a decision if they wanted to pursue this defined contribution versus defined benefit.
And I believe there's already been instruction, because we've been working with the CA's office to help develop benefits design for a new tier if the city were to consider something.
I know that we have discussed pension with both the police and fire and lacers. We've discussed that subject at EERC. That's been a subject of discussion. I can't say what we discussed, except it has discussed it. What the outcome is going to be, yet to be determined. But that's a concern, as you say, that the contribution, if you're not doing well, which hasn't been the case in the last couple of years, both laser, police, and fire, that's coming out of the general fund, which we keep talking about, the general fund getting deeper and deeper and how we're going to shore it up. So obviously it's an issue that we have to resolve, but I don't know if it's advantageous to change that to a defined contribution for the benefit of the employees that we want to attract as a career employee versus someone who's stopping through on their way to someplace else. I just like the career aspect. I think it serves the public a lot better.
And personally, I think it's a terrible idea as well. So I don't know if, should we
We
make
could
that
vote
recommendation?
no. We could vote, well,
This motion is simply asking for the report backs, and the letter that was submitted by Lacers will become a part of the council file. It's just not on your agenda, so that'll be part of what's available to Budget Committee.
Right. For the record, what's before you is the motion itself.
This is just the motion.
So either you adopt the motion as is, or you
So there's no
continue it.
action to be taken beyond asking them to report.
or how about if we reject it?
Well, you're just rejecting them reporting and giving you the information that they've been providing, because that's all the motion does, is ask for them to report.
What if we send it forward without a recommendation?
Well, the recommendation only asks them
Sir.
to report.
The item is,
June Gibson, a pension person.
no, I should have e-ripped. Now you're starting to scare me.
I don't know if it's too late for you. We'll see, we'll consult with your family on that one.
Well, there's one.
Maybe they like to keep you working.
The item is for the committee to consider the motion only. The motion will then be forwarded to Budget and Finance. So that's all that's
But what if
before you today.
we don't like the motion? What if we say nay?
You could certainly say that if you're not happy with the motion. The intention of the original motion was actually already adopted. The amended motion before you today, the original motion was never even adopted?
I don't believe so.
It was referred to Budget and Finance only, but that's not what's before the committee, so we don't want to go there.
Is what's before the committee just the amendment to add water and power to
Yes,
the list
yes,
of
yes.
places
For the
that are studied?
report back, so that there's a comprehensive report back to the
Oh, I
various
see.
committees
Okay,
of the
okay.
systems.
I just think that, okay, that's a broader scale. I don't have any problem with that.
Can we add a friendly amendment recommending against defined contribution, move in that direction?
Well, I think that the intention is that when the motion is considered by the full council, there's going to be another opportunity for the fine representatives of Lacers and the pension, police and fire pension system, as well as water and power. Those representatives will be providing a report back to council, and at that time, that's the opportunity for the full council to express its concerns with respect to the League of Women Voters recommendations.
Okay.
But before you make a motion, can I ask one other question?
Sure.
It's on topic, but well, it's a little off topic. But it would be
Tell Z-Woman that.
it would be of value to know this. Why do we have to increase our contribution now? Is there any kind of a statutory limit on how low a contribution can go? Is there any reason why your fund, for instance, has to add, I forget what it was, an extra $30 million? Why couldn't we contribute what we did in the past year and just let it drop a little bit?
There's an actuarial funding methodology. There are two components to the city's contribution. One is the normal cost that Mike talked about, which is your annual cost, the cost of the accumulated benefits allocated to the current year. The other portion is a amortization payment of the unfunded liabilities. Because of the major losses we've had over the last 2 years, we have an unfunded liability of $2.8 billion that has to be paid off like a mortgage. So we, based on our amortization policy and depending on what the unfunded liability is from, you amortize it over 15 years up to 30 years. So it's the normal cost. Normal cost is about 14% for Lacers for both the retirement and the health. And then a portion of the unfunded liability and the UAL cost is about 8%. So that combined gives you a contribution rate of over about 22% of pay. So that's how we come up with the contribution rate. So when those years, when we are 100% funded, all you're paying is the normal cost because your assets, you have enough assets to cover your liabilities. The unfunded is the difference between the assets and the liabilities.
And that's what's happened with the market, is it's taken a dip.
Right, so the worse, the bigger the losses, and that we smooth that out over numerous years so you don't get, in the 1 year loss for June 30, 09, we had a loss of about 19%. So that in itself, in market value terms, is about $2.1 billion. So instead of giving you the bill for $2.1 billion this year, we're spreading that out. So
that may be a legal process, but it seems like the timing is backwards, because when we're in really good times and we're able to contribute more, we don't contribute more. We just contribute the bottom.
That's right.
When we're really desperately short, we exacerbate it by contributing more. So isn't there some intelligent way to reverse that?
Well, we are looking
and
at
pay more, give ourselves some sort of a
Cushion.
a floor when we're in good times, and pay less in circumstances like this. So, have a guaranteed 12% or 15% or whatever it would be, regardless of what our finances are, and then not hit ourselves so hard at this point when we're in our worst possible situation.
Well, we're looking at the Lacers Board is looking at that right now, and as part of its overall actual funding policy, because one of our responsibilities is to mitigate the city's contribution. Our primary duty is to the members, but it's also to defray the cost of the plan. So, through our policies, we're trying to look at that. One way to address what you just talked about, and it's true because we have all the data and we can see the patterns. It's very cyclical.
And we do the
when,
opposite of
it's when the
working with
city
those
can least
patterns.
afford it is when the contribution rates go up, because we're impacted by the markets and the economy. But what you'll see is one way to address this is to ensure that the city has already adopted a financial policy that says in those years where the cost of our contribution rate, there were times when we were overfunded. We were over 100% funded. So you paid less than the normal cost. So they were back in the day of, in 2002, for instance, the contribution rate was 4.71% of pay, and compare that to 20% now.
This seems like a ridiculous mistake, and we also should probably shoot for above 100% funding so that we don't hit these bad times.
Right,
125% or 150% of funding, and never get below 10% or whatever.
Right, and that would take fiscal discipline to set aside that money in those good years. So let's say you want to, as part of the financial policy, it says that you're going to put in or put away at least the normal costs. You can set that aside to put in the reserve fund or whatever, a separate account. So in those times when you don't have that money, you can tap into that to then cover. So it won't be as big of a hit to the city's general fund. That would be one way to manage it from the city's perspective. On our side, in those years, if we ever get into those surplus years, we will, we're looking at amortizing those surpluses over a longer period of time. So we won't recognize all that gain in 1 year. We'll spread it out so it'll dampen the effects in future years, in those times when we have major losses.
So is there a way to do all of that more immediately, so that rather than looking at it and saying we're going to be, I don't remember the numbers, so I'll pull them out of the air, we're going to be $100 million short this year and have to contribute that and have that be part of our budget shortfall, and $300 million the following year. Is there no way to smooth all that and handle this more intelligently?
If you do that now, you're just
track that cut.
You're digging us into a deeper hole, and it's extremely difficult thing to do at this point in time. Not getting the contributions. I mean, the city could elect not to pay the entire contribution that we say ought to be paid, but the consequences of doing that are pretty extreme. We've already got a bond rating that's not good. That will be reported because it's an obligation of the city to pay that contribution. If it's not paid, the bond rating could suffer even more. I brought these issues up to Budget and Finance and the City Council many years back when the contributions from the city were extremely low. But what happened, and Sally pointed to it, was that there was a policy that was passed, not a law, but a policy. And what that means is it can be changed. So what
was that policy?
That policy was that whenever, it was like a rainy day fund, and I believe Councilman Parks was the one who got behind it, so that we would always pay the normal cost percent. And I think it's a good idea, but it is very difficult to do when those good times hit. There's going to be money available for other programs. I would add in, though, that one of the things that, and Bill pointed out to me just now, is last year one of the things we did is we're smoothing our assets over a 7-year period now instead of 5-year to try to reduce that volatility further. But in working with our actuary, it didn't make sense to go to a period any longer than that.
And the Lacers Board also took similar action in looking at its smoothing policy to help alleviate some of the drastic increases. So it is next year's contribution increase won't go as high as we had expected it to. So we changed our market corridor policy that's related to the asset smoothing. So it's helping out the city in the short term in these times. But the thing
are we capturing that savings in our budget discussions, or are we not aware of that yet?
Well, it's not savings. We're deferring a contribution that the city still owes to the system, and that's
well, it's a
really
savings for us now. It enables us to meet our budget requirements, and then hopefully in better years make up for it.
It's deferring the cost. So it's just, with pension benefits, you either pay now or you pay later.
But are we capturing that deferral in our
Yes,
budget
all of those
discussions?
new contribution rates are already provided to the CA's
So the
office.
$485 million shortfall already captures that savings.
Yes.
And one more question.
But the other
That's
most
not good news.
the most immediate thing that you will save on with respect to the contributions to Lacers is, the contribution rate is a percentage of payroll. You'll see in our data that even if we kept our contribution rate constant, let's say 10%, it's based on a payroll. As your payroll grows, your contribution amount is going to grow at that same rate. So even in those times, if we kept it flat, your contribution amounts to the system would have gone up a lot. So the piece that you are controlling is payroll. And one of the things that will help in the reducing the contributions to the city or to Lacers is the reduction in the payroll base. So, and that's being addressed through your, other reductions that you're doing.
What about the merge? Is that still a discussion on the table? Okay. The merge?
The merger between our two systems?
Or some of the functions of them. I know the middle level was discussed of having things like some of the financial advising functions.
We spent fund resources on that and had it addressed by council. That was actually a recommendation made by auditors that came in and looked at our fund and Lacers back in 2007. What they recommended was splitting each department up into two pieces, an investment function and a benefits function, and having the investment functions merge together and the benefits function merge together. Fiduciary Council advised us that that is not possible under the current configuration of the charter or the state constitution. Each of them would have to be changed in order for that to happen. The charter could be changed by a vote of the people here in LA, but the state constitution, it's highly unlikely that a change like that would occur covering pension plans throughout the state of California.
So they couldn't share their investment function?
The idea
Without a charter change, it would seem like you could hire the same people and just have take their advice.
No, that the boards have complete or plenary authority over the administration of the system, and the board that's in place now for fire and police pensions has that authority over all of investments, all of benefits operations, everything. Now, one of the things we are doing, as we initiated this a while back, is we're working with Lacers to find cost savings in the area of our money manager costs, which is the most significant thing that we have in our budget. We spend $75 million a year on money manager costs and around $17 million on everything else. So we're working with them and have actually achieved some savings to get that done.
Do you guys use the same financial advisors?
Yeah.
There's some overlap.
So that we could consolidate that and save money.
Yeah, could
Right.
you make it 100% overlap? You both, other than this disaster, generally both systems have been very effective and not that far apart in their recommendations and results. So.
It is our continued desire to find efficiencies where appropriate and find a lot of synergies, and I think we're going to take advantage of those areas where we can find those economies of scale and efficiencies to save money for both systems and the city. So where we can, we are looking at that. The difficulty is having two separate boards. You have two separate policies. We try and coordinate our efforts as best we can, but with different kind of policy agendas, it is difficult to agree on what manager you want because we have different risk pools, liabilities that we have to meet and diversify our portfolios that way. So
Could you not make more of an effort to come up with policies that jive with each other and do all the logical
well, you know what?
things
At
that
this
make it
point,
similar?
I would defer to the city attorney as to whether or not the city council is getting into territory that's protected by Prop 162.
Well, it's up to the. I'm sorry. I'm just going to interject.
It's okay.
The makeup of the boards are created by charter.
Right.
So if you want to combine the boards,
No.
or, that could be done through charter change.
Nobody's combined some of the administrative, in other words, save money on both sides. Like, for example, you go to the airport, you're both going to the same convention, you share the cab. You know what? Instead
No,
of having
and
separate-
we agree, and Mike and I are committed to working together and trying
You're
to
both
save
reasonable
money.
people.
Absolutely.
And I'm in
and you
both
would have to
districts, so I like that.
right, and you would have to speak to the boards in terms of aligning their policies because that would be it would make our work much easier if that were the case. But we have a 7-member board and Mike has a 9-member board. So
Who had the scandal? Which one of you?
Well, it depends on what you define it as, but we both had losses of commissioners. But in terms of the greater scandal,
Yeah.
potential for it lies with us. We actually had a board member who was being investigated by the SEC and resigned from the board May 7th. At a subsequent meeting of the board, I got an alert on my BlackBerry, during the board meeting, and that board member who had resigned had pleaded guilty in Manhattan court to corruption of government officials in the New York State Common Fund, and faces up to 4 years in prison and a fine of $18 million.
Jeez.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do we screen these people before we put them in commission?
Yes, sir. They're done. The mayor appoints, and city council, budget and finance reviews them, and
We need to do a
city
better
council
job.
confirms. I think that's worth taking a look
We
at.
need to do a better job. Why don't, while we transition into corruption, some neighborhood council people are going to jail for embezzlement of public funds. One was a convicted robber who was the treasurer of the neighborhood council.
God. Oh, one more question on this. My recollection of reading about the audits and passing were that there was an estimate that the two systems together, if they merged the functions that they could merge while remaining independent and having independent boards, could save as much as $500 million over 30 years. Do you see a practical number? I mean, that would probably be in the utopian world. What do you see as a more realistic number?
I don't believe the savings was that high, but in working with the controller's office, we've asked for the backup of that analysis so we can figure out how they came up with those savings numbers. Because of course, if there are ways to save money, we will do everything we can to do that. But really, we need to know how they derive that number.
Yeah, we disputed those numbers as well. We didn't think there was a foundation for it. Asked the auditors to provide the foundation. They did not give it to us.
At least we're fortunate to have two folks that are running those systems that cooperate and get along, and there's not this rivalry and back and forth. It's a cordial, cooperative relationship, and it's all about money for our retirees from the city of Los Angeles, whatever capacity they serve the people. With that, any other questions? We'll approve that and send that forward.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. And that concludes the meeting.